please don't like mushrooms.
Right.
That's going to be the number one takeaway this week.
Don't eat things that you don't know for sure what they are, even.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Bad plan. Welcome to Revisiting the Vault, a podcast where we're looking at the history of art, animation, music, and just about everything else, but through a Disney lens. I am Mary Ratliff. I am a writer, visual storyteller, film nerd in general.
And I am Gretchen Harwell. I am a vet tech. I like to sew. I have a kid who watches Disney stuff. And I actually have not seen most Disney movies. And I had not seen this one until yesterday. So I came to it fresh.
For anybody that might actually tune in randomly in the middle and not know what this is about, which, doesn't really happen in podcasts, but just in case for those people, what we're doing is we are watching all of the Disney animated theatrical features in chronological order. This week, we have made our way to 1951, Alice in Wonderland. Classic, but not when it came out. Notably, Alice in Wonderland and Cinderella were sort of competing to see which one was going to get finished first.
Right.
And which one was going to come out first. I said it last week, I definitely still agree with myself. Cinderella coming out first after their sort of lull years for the package films.
Yeah, the lean years.
Having Cinderella be the first one out of the gate was the right choice.
I think so, because especially given the reception for this movie was not awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty lukewarm.
It could have been that this movie would have sunk them the rest of the way down. They were already not doing great. I won't say that I hated this movie or anything like that. But when you hold it up beside Cinderella, well, Cinderella's just the better movie.
Alice in Wonderland, if we want to go ahead and dive into like the pacing and the structure of it, there isn't any.
No. Actually, that makes me think of the story Goodnight Moon and why that is such a popular book for babies. And it's because right around bedtime, their minds just go, it's like, okay, yeah, good night, bowl of mush. Good night, hairbrush. All those things. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just pleasant to hear. And in the same way, This story is a bunch of nonsense all strung together, and it's fine. And I do think it probably has more appeal to kids than what I would give it credit for.
Right.
But again, I don't really truck with nonsense that much. And so that was part of my frustration with this.
It does have to be that's part of your thing. But you're right. I mean, that's a perfectly good description. But it's funny because what Cindy was telling me is that why she likes Alice in Wonderland is the same reason why she really likes this one writer, Jasper Fforde. She likes those sort of nonsensy, weird headspace kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that is very much what this is. And so if that's what you're into, if you like books like Jasper Fforde, 100%.
Right.
Depending on my mood, this is the thing. The images, the character design, some of the scenes, a lot of things about Alice in Wonderland, and this version specifically, because, we'll get into how many versions there have stuck with me and do stay, in my head all the time.
I think some of that, in this case, Disney paid for the original artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And so he bought it, and they had to sort of Disneyfy it a little bit in order to animate it. But he paid for that. And so if you've read the books and or seen the movie, these are the images that will stick with you.
The other thing with the art style is that they had Mary Blair, who we talked about in the package films.
Mm-hmm.
Her artwork and her art style inspired It's a Small World. She did the concept drawings for Alice in Wonderland, and they really let the style be influenced by her style. That's how they got such the painterly quality to it, I think.
Yes.
When you look at a picture, the one that comes to mind most easily, because I think it's the one people use the most, is the original drawing of Alice with the flamingo playing croquet.
Yeah.
You look at that right next to Disney's character design. You see it. You see straight across. And you have this book that took the world by storm when it came out. The book was an immediate success. Completely changed the face of children's literature.
Right.
We were talking about that kids don't really need things that are the way that adults are sort of taking them in. That kids are okay with sort of just weird nonsense stories and stuff. And this is sort of the book that made people start to see that.
Yes.
And start to think about just entertaining children rather than trying to teach them a Victorian life lesson.
You're gonna die in a coal mill.
I mean, who'd have thought that maybe kids just liked having fun and telling silly stories about walruses that can talk? You know, it was that and the illustrations, too, that go with it that were so indelible and made such an impact that by the time that this movie came out in 1951, Alice in Wonderland had been adapted. I counted on Wikipedia, there were 12 film adaptations before this one.
Right.
12. Including some short live-action animation hybrids that we mentioned also in the package film episode, the Alice comedies.
Right, and Walt Disney had done one of them.
That was his, and he had been planning this since before Snow White. He had been wanting to do an Alice movie.
Right.
He had talked about apparently doing it as a live-action animation hybrid with Mary Pickford, which would be a very, very different movie.
Yeah, I had read that, like, didn't his first go at it was in 1923.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody wanted to make this work, basically.
Right. And they still do. I mean, that's probably better suited for the end of the episode, and we'll get to it, but, like, they are still constantly adapting Alice in Wonderland to the point where Disney Channel just started a new animated kids show a couple months ago.
Yes.
That is based specifically on this movie more.
To some extent, you can also still see the very clear stylistic influences. Like, okay, yeah, Disney owned that property, and they're going to go with it so that every time you see that image, you know just who it is and what the story is. That new one is like she has a bakery, right? Or something.
It's like Alice's Wonderland Bakery.
Yeah, anyway.
Thinking about Alice in Wonderland, the movie, while I was watching it, I feel like there are sections that are going to go over kids' heads. I feel like there are sections that kids aren't going to like. Because we had a few places in the notes where both of us were like, where I would be like, I remember not liking this character and I don't know why. And then they would do something terrible and be like, oh, that's why.
Yes.
At the same time, it felt like the kind of movie, like, we were talking about some of the older ones, and I was like, who is this for?
Right.
Who should watch this? Who's going to watch this?
This is clearly for children.
And I think that even kids now probably would enjoy it. I think there are parts that they'll find that'll be a little weird, that'll stick in their heads in a weird way.
I think there's a cutoff into what the age it's for, because my daughter watched it, I think, last year, and she's 9.5 now. It's possible she watched it when she was 7. She was just like, what is happening? Now, to be fair, she's my child. So it could honestly be that. Or maybe she wasn't in the mood for it. Who knows?
There are things that just come at you at the wrong time for one reason or another. But I think Alice in Wonderland, to me, is the kind of thing that's almost better enjoyed in pieces.
Sure.
Because it doesn't have any real connective tissue whatsoever. You can watch 5 minutes of Alice in Wonderland, and you will understand it just as much and just as little as you would if you would watch the whole movie.
Yes. The whole premise is like Alice, you don't really know it, but she has fallen asleep under a tree.
Right.
And she chases the white rabbit. And she goes down the rabbit hole. She falls down an underground cliff, which... Okay.
She's totally fine with.
Yeah, she's not in the least bit scared. I guess maybe because her fall is slow, because her skirt poofs out. It is her trip kind of through Wonderland to some extent. And I'm sure we'll get more into the movie itself in a bit, but that's it. So it's basically like, oh, I went to this place. It's like, honestly, if I told you in depth with animation about my trip to Disney.
Yeah.
Like if really weird stuff happened while I was at Disney, and then I came home. And that was it. And so that's kind of how the story works. And so you could pull out a snippet of this movie, and it's just like, oh yeah, that was the day I was at Magic Kingdom.
And because they make it so very plain in the movie that she's dreaming, which I did not remember. I have a whole rant about movies and properties where they have that like question mark. Was it a dream? Was it real? Are they asleep? Are they awake? I hate that.
Yeah.
I hate that ambiguity. Like, I'm fine with it existing in the narrative itself. I hate the conversations around it.
Right.
Pan's Labyrinth is a little bit that way of, did these things really happen to her or not? I'm always going to be like, they did. Can we stop talking about it?
Yeah.
Because if they didn't, why did we watch the movie?
Right.
But it very much, if you've ever had somebody, but especially I think if you've ever had a 10-year-old kid tell you about a dream they had last night.
Oh, yeah.
That's what this movie is. And then I was in the woods and there was this cat, but like, it was singing, but then part of it disappeared, but then it came back. But then only its head was there. And then it told me to go to the Queen. And I went to the Queen. And you're like, what Queen? And they're like, the Queen. And
you know. Like, the Queen. Honestly, that's still how my dreams go. So...
Yeah, not to get too into the weird sleep science stuff, but they still don't really know why we dream or why we dream the way we do.
Right.
There are a lot of theories about how it's about consolidating memory. And so you're sort of replaying things that happened as your brain's kind of like filing it into long-term memory. But because of the way your brain is doing it, it's doing it in a really garbled, weird way.
Right.
But then it's also like, there's a bird that's like glasses and it perched on my face.
Yes.
One of the things that I got lost in, and by the way, I put a note here, the drinking game for this episode is to take a shot every time we either say rabbit hole or we twist a sentence around and torture it to not say rabbit hole.
Right.
Because that's when I say that like the cultural impact of this story is just huge for it being the 1880s. 1865 is when the first one came out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we're talking about Cinderella, where like it's been around since before recorded history, practically.
Right.
We're talking about a lot of these things that are sort of these myths and folklore that's been around for ages and all this. And this one, when it came out less than 100 years before this film adaptation was done, which when I say less than 100 years, that sounds like forever, but
not really.
In the grand scheme, for the way that Alice in Wonderland and the lines from it and the quotes and the images have like seeped into everything to the point where like, I mean, the Matrix, try to do the Matrix without any Alice in Wonderland references and the whole thing falls apart.
Right.
It's so in everything.
Yes.
One of the things that I was looking at, I did not spend a ton of time on Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodgson, and the writing of this because I feel like there are dozens of academic tomes about all of this.
Right.
And I find a lot of it pretty tired most of the time. But one of the things that a lot of people have done is trying to pick out which random character is inspired by what real life person.
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, Bill the Lizard is based on this random professor. You know, on the one hand, I wonder, because I haven't read these academic tomes about it, so I don't know how good their evidence is for these things.
Right.
But at the same time, yeah, a lot of authors do things like that. And when you're telling a random nonsense story to kids, you are going to do something like that.
Totally.
There is quite a bit of it where I'm just like, why is this character like this? Why are they doing that? And then I'm like, maybe it's because that guy did that. Apparently, the dodo is based on Lewis Carroll himself, which is okay. The dodo really doesn't do much, so you don't get a sense of it in the movie. I thought about trying to reread the book, but I have book club this weekend and I didn't have time.
Yeah.
So this is a weird thing for somebody that did 7 years in film school to say, but I don't really get into that whole, like, picking apart the symbolism of trying to get super underneath all of what things are supposed to mean. I'm like, you know, if that was what they really were trying to say, then either they needed to say it better.
Right.
Or they didn't actually say that because it's not actually there. It's just you putting that in there.
Right.
If you are a person who is interested in that kind of thing, looking into the writing of Alice in Wonderland, or Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass are the names of the books. Looking into the writing of that, there's a lot there about, like, what is this supposed to mean? Is this a symbol for this? Again, you know, I don't want to get too deep into it because so many people have done so much of it about, you know, what was Lewis Carroll's motivation? What kind of person was he? I keep saying Lewis Carroll because his actual name is Charles Dodgson. And for some reason, that is a name I've been stumbling over every time I've tried to say it. Like, the S's are in the wrong place for my mouth. I don't know. But I mean, thinking about the symbolism, where you were saying that people don't even necessarily realize that that's where they got things. This is a book that's done that, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And a movie.
How many times when we've been talking about other movies have we said things like, well, that's a whole different rabbit hole to go down.
Right.
That is 100% from this movie. I'm telling you here and now, my school put this on as a play when I was a kid, but I never saw this movie until yesterday.
Right.
And I know all those things.
I watched it when I was a kid, but it's one of those, it's sort of like the first two Star Wars movies where, like, they've just always existed in my life. I've just always have already seen them. Alice in Wonderland is one of those things that just always existed. And when I looked it up, the very first VHS release was actually in 1981. It was one of the first Disney movies that they started trying out the home entertainment market. Because I know this is going to be weird for people who are younger than us, but, like, VHS is actually VHS if you know what that is.
Right.
In 1981 was relatively new. Alice in Wonderland, and maybe it was watching it on the Disney Channel when they were showing pieces of it or something, because apparently they aired it on television a lot too.
Right.
It was a movie that was so lukewarm for them when it came out. The critical reception, the actual box office, everything was just kind of eh. Whenever they were trying something new, they were like, oh, we've got this, you know, this new, like, TV show where we're showing Disney movies on Sunday night. what do we want to start with? And Alice in Wonderland was like the second one.
Yeah.
So they would just trot it out to try things. And so I just have always had a memory of a lot of these things, but I don't have a memory of sitting down and watching it like I do Cinderella. Like, I remember watching Cinderella, partially because we watched it like once a week.
Right.
But then, you know, as I'm watching it, there were just so many places where I was just confused because I didn't remember that was in this movie, or I didn't remember that this part led to this part. My notes are just a whole bunch of quotes of me being like, I say that all the time. That's from this.
Right.
Which a lot of them, admittedly, are from the book. I think that I give myself very good advice, but I very seldom follow it, which I say all the time. I think that's from the book. Curiouser and curiouser, say it all the time.
Right. There are things that you absorb without necessarily knowing the source. And
Yeah.
so the I give myself good advice quote, that's one that I've known too, but I had no idea it was from this because I had never seen it. You know, we're going on a rabbit hole here.
I know. Our plot is about as concise and organized as Alice's.
Yes.
You know, I saw on the Disney Wiki for this, they have like a breakdown of the changes between the book and the movie. Pinocchio was a massive departure.
Mm-hmm.
Bambi had a lot of changes, but seemed to follow the spirit fairly closely, actually. And I feel like this one's really in the middle. I think this is probably the first one where, like, even contemporaneously, Disney got in trouble with people who loved the book and were mad at the changes.
Right.
I didn't read anything about people getting mad that they didn't have the extra character in Bambi that got took out or whatever.
Right.
Or they expanded this role. Like, I don't remember reading anybody getting mad about that, but people got upset that things were different in this. But then I was reading over, like, compared to the books, here's all of the characters that aren't in the movie, which there are quite a lot. But then they're like, oh, here's the things that are different in the book. And they are small, petty changes.
So people were real precious about their story.
Yeah, and I think that's adaptation's always going to be that way, and I feel like when we get, and it's going to be a while, but when we get to the Black Cauldron, that is going to be like the theme of that episode.
Yeah.
Which, incidentally, odd connection, this was the first time I noticed ending credits of any sort. They're like a minute of showing the voice actors and their names.
Yeah.
Which is the first time they credit the voice actors on screen, and the first time they had ending credits. I read that they don't have ending credits again until the Black Cauldron, which is in the 80s. So they're just like, yeah, we did that once. It didn't work.
Yeah, that movie wasn't popular, and it's because we put those credits in there.
Yeah, it's the first Disney movie to have ending credits. The second is the Black Cauldron, but the Black Cauldron has no opening credits.
Right.
So I find that interesting, but having like the full credits of like everybody that worked on the movie be at the end was not happening in the 50s. In the 50s, everybody got the credit up front, and in Alice in Wonderland, it's on these beautiful title cards. I imagine probably done by Mary Blair, where it's characters and scenes from the film. We've talked about sort of the opening stuff a little bit, where Dumbo had the circus poster art, and like Cinderella had the sort of storybook art.
Right.
And this one's actually, here's Bill the Lizard getting shot up out of the chimney.
Right, and here's the Queen. Because one of my very first notes was, boy, the Queen looks masculine. You don't see her till nearly the end of the film. She shows up right at the very beginning.
And again, villains. Disney does villains. They do villains so well. And she is one of their, like, she's not always with the Disney villains when they do a villains themed thing, marketing thing. Because Disney princesses and Disney villains are marketing gimmicks.
Yes.
They are. But they don't always include the Red Queen, but they frequently do. And she doesn't really have that much in the movie. She's very close to the end. She has, I mean, they're long scenes, but they're like 2 or 3. But she is extremely memorable.
Yes, and you know, funnily enough, that's actually a thing that I had put in my notes, is there are a lot of characters in this film that are really memorable. But if you total up their screen time, it is very short.
Yeah.
If you look at the Cheshire Cat.
Yeah, I was going to say he's barely there, and then I'm like, dun-dun-dun.
Yeah, I know. I was like, yeah. He literally disappears.
Right.
He's there, and you think, oh, it's the Cheshire Cat. And you're like, oh, wait, that was it? That's it? And is he going to come back? And then he does. But again, it's so short. And the Mad Hatter.
Yeah. He has his wacky tea party.
Yes.
And then he comes back to give evidence. And that's it.
That's it.
That's all he does. When you look, which I have not watched it all the way through, I have only seen parts of it because it is very much not my thing. But if you look at the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland, and almost every Alice in Wonderland adaptation where they start messing with it, where it's not like a straight adaptation, they make the Mad Hatter a main character almost every time.
Yeah.
Almost all of them.
And I mean, to be fair, also, one of his very short scenes is Mary, Mary on Birthday.
Which is the best song in the movie.
Sure. And I didn't like that scene. I have nothing against the song, but the two are intertwined for me.
Right.
And
right.
so, and we'll get to why I didn't like that scene. It's nothing shocking. It's because I can't truck with nonsense. But you get that whole thing, and that song is very memorable. And so people are like, oh, it's the Mad Hatter. But then if you go back to like add up the number of minutes that he is on screen in this movie, it's not very many. It just isn't.
It's interesting. I mean, looking at Mary on Birthday, I mean, for one thing, like I said, it's the best song in the movie. This movie has more songs than any Disney movie. I read, it definitely was the most songs to that point. I've read that it's still the most, which would not surprise me. I think it has 14 or something crazy.
Right.
Most of them are where there were poems in the original book and Walt wanted to keep them, so he said put it to music and make it a song.
Right. A lot of them are pretty forgettable.
Yeah.
And also I read originally there were, I think, even more. And sometimes they got turned into background music, scoring, whatever. There was a ton of music done specifically for this film.
Yeah. Again, with the Disney Wiki, 30 songs that were demo recorded and then not put in the movie. 30.
Yeah.
That didn't make it.
Right.
Then you've got 14 songs, many of which just don't need to be songs.
No.
I don't know why Dodo started singing Smoke the Blighter Out.
I had issues with Dodo.
How Do You Do and Shake Hands, Tweedledee and Tweedledum is a song. The word song is a bit of a stretch, I feel.
Yeah.
I feel like sing-songing 4 lines doesn't necessarily make it a song.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. A lot of these, it was a stretch to call them a song. But, I mean, again, a lot of this movie was a stretch for me. So, like, I don't mean to sound bitter, you know. I mean, it's just one of these things that I was just like,
I'm looking at this list and, like, going into this movie, if you had read this list to me and said, do you remember these songs? I remember parts of the poem, The Walrus and the Carpenter, because the time has come, the walrus said, to talk of other things. It's a line that's said a lot. Captives and kings. It's, you know, it comes up a lot. So I would have probably remembered those things eventually. All in the Golden Afternoon, I would have been like, oh, wait, yeah. Though that actually is a lovely song.
Right.
But then I would have said, oh, yeah, Unbirthday and Painting the Roses Red.
Yeah.
That's it. Painting the Roses Red, I do sing to myself sometimes on random occasions if it pops into my head. Unbirthday, it feels like a song that's designed for toddlers to get to sing around the house.
Yes. I will say, I think I'm Late also. That's another one that even I knew that song.
Yeah, and part of me is like, that's again one where I have a little bit of trouble calling it a song.
Yeah, because it's basically 6 words said sing-songy.
I can hear it, the way he says it, the exact words, the tone and everything, does go through my head every time I'm late for anything.
Right. Anyway, I mean, that at the end of the day, it's still...
Maybe it's a good way to jump into the voice acting.
Sure.
Because I think that these songs were not particularly memorable in general. You didn't have any that came out of it that, I mean, obviously Unbirthday is something that, like, people still sing, they still have stuck in their head or whatever, but you don't have something like When You Wish Upon a Star, A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes. Right. You don't have anything like that in this movie. But, I will argue, you have some of the best voice acting they've had so far.
Yes.
When I was looking up these voice actors, some of them are repeats. We've got Sterling Holloway is back.
Yes.
I was halfway through the Cheshire Cat scene going, why do I know this voice? I know this voice. I know it. And then in my notes, it's Winnie the Pooh, isn't it?
Yes.
And then at the end of the movie, when the voice actors popped up, I go, oh my God, Sterling Holloway. And Cindy's like, I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm like, his name has come up a lot already, okay? Because he is the stork, and Dumbo was his first thing. He's our friend the stork.
Right.
Sterling Holloway doing a voice that is very much Winnie the Pooh.
Yes.
We have Verna Felton is back being the Queen of Hearts.
Yes. Honestly, as soon as I heard the Queen, I was like, oh, it's the bitchy elephant.
When you hear it, you're like, there's the bitchy elephant. But you're not saying there's the fairy godmother.
Yes, I thought that exact thing. I was like, man.
When you're really listening, you can start to hear it. But if you're like, why is she familiar? Oh, she's the bitchy elephant. Your brain can make that connection if you're like a voice actor.
Mm-hmm.
But tracing her back to the fairy godmother, which had just happened, she may have recorded those lines only months apart. But it's a very different performance. And it is the character design for the Red Queen. Yes, very masculine.
Mm-hmm.
And yet at the same time, I still love it. She's very catchy. Like, she's very the coloring that they use, the shapes, like, I don't even know how to describe it. This is where, like, all of my art history learnings just completely fail me.
Right.
Because I'm like, I don't know, I just like it.
Right. It's good because I said so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, it's good because I don't know what art is, but I know it when I see it.
Right.
But yeah, and I think some of that, though, does fall back. I think if you just showed me a picture and I didn't know her voice at all and I had never heard it, I don't know that I would have as strong a reaction. And then when she does show up and she does start talking, that makes the character.
Right.
It's just, Verna Felton really sells it.
Yes, she does.
And I love that she's going to come back. I love that this isn't her last one.
Yes. Also, I will say this is another one where they filmed a whole live action, everything, and animated based on that. I saw stills from that, and the person who was the Red Queen, you can see it. You know, she's in a gigantic dress. She's a big woman. And the girl playing Alice is there, and she's like a third this person's size.
They were hiring people of the appropriate ages. They did hire a kid to play Alice.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a thing about how they changed, I think it was the March Hare's character design. They actually changed to match the voice actor better. And you can see it.
Yeah.
And they really are, at this point, learning how valuable the voice cast is to their process. And you can see how well they're using it, because I think that this animation, just take the plot, let's take the songs, let's set it in a box over the side, and like let's just look at it as a visual work, a moving visual picture. It's great.
Yeah.
It's got, you noted that there's very different art styles for the real world and Wonderland.
Yes.
The real world is very much done as an impressionist painting kind of idea.
Yes.
It's beautiful. I want just like some stills of those backgrounds to like hang on my wall.
Yeah.
That garden's lovely.
The scene where you see Alice up against the tree or sitting in the branch and you can see the water behind her and there are weeping willows and all this stuff. And I was just like, if this is what this whole movie is, sign me up. I'm here.
Sadly, it's not. But
No.
when they go to Wonderland, like she's in a different world. It feels like a different world.
Yep.
But it's still done in an appropriate art style.
Right.
For what it's meant to convey to us.
So that brings me to one of the tidbits that I found was that some of this animation was influenced by Salvador Dali.
Oh, you can see it.
When you're looking at the stuff in Wonderland, you're like, well, yeah. Doesn't it go without saying?
When I saw that in the notes, I was like, yeah, of course. I think that it's easy to forget. Dali was actually a contemporary at that time.
Right.
Born 1904, died. Is that right? Wow. Okay, so he died in 1989.
Yeah.
So he was very much a cultural figure at that point.
And if you really think about it, though, if you think Disney, you don't think Dali.
No.
It's not like, oh, yeah, they go hand in hand. No, they certainly do not. And yet, when you look at this animation, the Wonderland animation specifically, you're like, well, duh. Well done.
I think it's something to be said for, like, the individual animators that
Yeah.
are working on this. You know, you've got, like, the 9 old men and everything happening at this point. They were pulling their influences from a whole lot of places.
Yes.
And they were very... I'm trying to figure out the right words for what I'm trying to say. I think that people have a tendency, especially in modern times, to think of people who are sort of in the trenches working in animation as, like, not real, quote-unquote, real artists.
Mm-hmm.
And not real art. But these men were artists, and they knew their art history, and they knew what was going on in, like, the fine art world. And
Right.
they were pulling it in, and they were using it for inspiration for making things like this. And also, they're going back to those original illustrations, which were very good.
Yes. Yes.
Those original illustrations are excellent.
You know, that actually makes me want to look something up real quick. So just talk amongst yourself.
Talking about the animation, though, I've got this really great quote that I found where Leonard Maltin apparently was interviewing Ward Kimball, who was one of the people. He did the design. I think we talked about him because he did Lucifer and then also the Cheshire Cat.
Yes.
They asked him about like why Alice in Wonderland didn't really do that well. And his quote is, "It suffered from too many cooks, directors.
Yes.
Here was a case of 5 directors each trying to top the other guy and make his sequence the biggest and craziest in the show. That had a self-canceling effect on the final product." And Walt Disney himself said that Alice, the character, had no heart. Yes, they knew it. They knew it at the time with what they were doing. The failure there is, it's in the directing. It's not, those animators and that voice acting, they were both knocking it out of the park. I think the directors just, there was nobody pulling it together.
Yes. Okay, I finished looking up the thing. No, I agree. And I really liked that quote too, because it does, in a way, that's one of the things that I think in the end does make it feel kind of disjointed. A, it's the nature of the story. And then B, he wasn't wrong. There were, like he said, too many cooks in the kitchen. And they were all trying to make their own masterpiece.
They were all trying to make sure that Walt loved them and what they did, and that their scene was the most popular.
Right.
I mean, 5 directors, like, good God. I worked on a couple shorts with 2 directors, and they were, like, best friends and worked really well together, and it was still difficult.
Yeah, it's rough.
Duos as directors is more common now. The Daniels and the Duffer Brothers and the Russo brothers and stuff like that. But 5? Trying to make a single cohesive vision with 5 people nominally in charge is insane. It's completely illogical in a way that this movie could not survive.
Right, yeah. Well, so the thing I was looking up was, we were talking about the original artwork, and yes, so, we talked about whether Lucifer was kind of the proto Cheshire Cat. No, not really, as it turns out, because if you look at the original artwork, it's that. The teeth are weird, right? Because he doesn't have canines.
Because they're trying to make the smile into like a smile that we think of as a smile, and cats don't smile. Do that.
Right. I think it's probably the way cats are animated. Unless it's like a Dinah kitten or Cleo,
right?
They're going to be this big potato with legs and a big head.
Yeah, I feel like they were sort of there are 2 kinds of cats in this world.
Mm-hmm. There's a kitten.
There's Dinah, there's Figaro.
Oh, Figaro, that's right. Cleo's the fish.
Cleo's the fish with the eyelashes. There's Dinah and there's Figaro, and they're small and they're cute and they go murr. And I loved Dinah.
Yes,
ugh.
Dinah's adorable.
And then you have the Cheshire Cat / Lucifer, which are like short, squat.
They are a potato with a head and legs.
Yeah, they really are. Anyway, we were talking about the illustrations for the Cheshire Cat.
Yes.
The Cheshire Cat is very much like the original imagery.
Yes. One of the things, I was looking up the clothing. That's the thing I actually just had to look up. This story is mid-Victorian, came out in, 1865. This all adds up.
Yeah.
But Alice is dressed I was looking up mid-Victorian children's clothing, and it's just, from what I could find, I'm sure it actually was, but I just couldn't find pictures of it. And maybe it's because the thing there are pictures of are more like fancy clothes, and this would be play clothes.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's really what it is, but I really couldn't find stuff. But then when you look at the illustrations, the original artwork, it's like, nope, that's what she was wearing. That's it right there. Really, she's wearing a pioneer dress. That's what she's wearing in the animated version. It is decidedly American looking, post-Civil War, sure. But also 1950s girls' dresses were pretty reminiscent of that. They had the short puffed sleeve. And that's the other thing. Most Victorian stuff was longer sleeved. And it is true that a girl's dress up till the age of around 12 would come down to about her knees. And then from 12 to 17, it would be a little bit longer than that. And then once she reached adulthood, it would be a floor length dress. So that part they nailed. But more often than not, girls wore boots. They didn't wear those little slipper shoes unless it was like some sort of evening thing. It was just kind of like if you read Regency novels, women wore boots when they were out and about. It's really interesting because if you're looking for artwork that shows it, it's hard to find anything that looks like what Alice is wearing. But then the original artwork from the book, that is exactly what Alice is wearing. Yeah,
I mean, it has a little more detail because it's a pencil drawing where they're doing more shading.
But it's still...
Other than that, it's a dress with
the white
apron on front.
It's in the original artwork. And so it's kind of like they nailed it. Whatever it is. Whatever it is, they crushed it. And then, so I want to clear up something I said in the Cinderella episode because I was talking about Christian Dior and I was speaking, kind of off the cuff. I was right, more or less. His new look launched in 1947, and he was decidedly trying to revive the Paris fashion world and the fashion scene, and he was trying decidedly to give women their curves back because those silhouettes of the 1940s and the 1930s were so much more narrow, wide shoulders, little waist, narrow skirt. And he was like, no, let them be feminine. And the discussion of what that means is not for this podcast. I'm talking about what he envisioned and what was the cultural norm then for what feminine was. So to me, it is clear, and conscious or not, that this influenced some of the look of Cinderella's ball gown. Or at least when people saw that movie, they were like, well, yeah, that's what a ball gown looks like, because that's what I've been seeing. That new look silhouette, it, not unlike how Alice in Wonderland took over, so did Christian Dior. And then he died in 1957. So he had a very short active time period where he was his own house. But holy crackers, when you listen to fashion historians talk about him, he was a wave. So anyway, that was just a little aside, and it kind of does tie in because you can look at Alice's silhouette too, and to a certain extent, she kind of has the kid version of that silhouette.
She really does. It is, if you just took that skirt and like let it go to the floor, like just let it follow the line and extended it, it would be extraordinarily similar.
Yeah, even the new look stuff a lot of that was shorter. So if you think like a June Cleaver dress.
That sort of, we're at the very beginning, this is 1951, the 50s housewife aesthetic is starting right here.
And it's Christian Dior.
I think you can see that in Alice, as much as it is extremely reminiscent of those original drawings.
Yeah.
Which were in the 1860s, admittedly. But when you look at the way that they animate it and the way that they did her character design, I think that you can really see the beginnings of that aesthetic.
And can we talk about her animation just for a second?
Yeah.
She has a weirdly large head. Her head is too big for her body. It's consistently that way. I know it's a choice. I'm not here to argue about it. I'm just saying her head is big.
I'm wondering if it comes from that Mary Blair influence, because if you look at It's a Small World.
Yeah, lollipop heads.
It is also, when you start looking at the history of animation, especially when people start trying to trace back, we're not going to get into anime and why anime looks the way it does. I mean, we might one day, but one of the things about why animated characters look the way they do, like if somebody wants to sit and break down, like, why does Mickey Mouse look like Mickey Mouse? They are trying to be reminiscent of babies.
Yeah.
A lot of animated characters are drawn with the ratio of their eyes to their face and their head to their bodies that is more akin to babies than adults. And that is the anthropomorphized animals, the human characters. It's kind of across the board. And that's not just Disney that's doing that, but Disney perfected it. And Disney made it what we expect.
If we go back to our discussion about Snow White and Betty Boop.
Right.
You know, there is a science of cute. And it is what appeals to us on an instinctive level. It makes sense, but her head is it's one of those things that it's a little more noticeable than we've seen with really anybody. And even the person that we found out is her sister.
Yeah, that opening scene is very interesting to me because A, the song, again, forgettable. B, has some very tortured rhymes.
Yes.
I don't remember which one it was. Houses and trousers.
Right.
Doesn't rhyme.
Nope.
It's like a pop song where they're just trying to force it. And this is sort of a grand tradition of this kind of It Was All a Dream story. She sings this song where she lays out literally everything that's about to happen.
Yes.
Animals would wear waistcoats and have houses, and they would be doing these things, and logic wouldn't apply, and she sings a song that is literally about everything that's about to happen in a much more on-the-nose way than they will do later. Disney does have a lot of those kind of songs in the beginning, where they're just like, let's foreshadow the movie. But this one is very explicit.
Yeah, it's pretty on the nose.
I'm way more distracted at this point by Dinah. Like, there are so many things where I'm just like, why is Alice doing this? And again, this is an adult watching a children's movie that is based on a book that was specifically designed to be nonsense.
Yes.
So, I will admit, if a rabbit ran past me wearing clothes and talking, I would probably follow it.
Sure.
More than likely, I would be like, what in the world?
If the rabbit's sclera, which is to say the whites of his eyes, were pink, I would follow it.
He's got some sort of weird disease.
I would take it to a vet and say, Doctor, something's wrong with my pet rabbit. Don't disregard the waistcoat, doctor, and the watch. Just treat his eyes. So, yes.
I just put clothes on him because it's funny. But I don't know that I would crawl in a fallen log.
Nope. Ticks and snakes.
But then she falls down the rabbit hole.
Yep.
And she is 100% chill.
Yes, she's
the
like...
whole thing. It's fine.
She's looking around. She touches a few things.
And that scene, beautifully animated.
Yes, I thought so too. I loved it. They did it really, really well. And maybe it's like this is... I couldn't say if it was the first time this was done or not. I have no idea. But when you watch that, it's just... Yeah, they nailed it. It's a thing you've seen, but I don't know that you've seen it that well.
Lighting effects in that, where the light is changing very distinctly.
Yeah, you're seeing shadows.
I thought it was interesting, actually, to me, and maybe it's because it hasn't gone through the same restoration process as Cinderella.
Yeah.
I never noticed any of those flat places.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like, the color payoff is solid the whole way through.
It really is. So we had a part, I made a note where I was like, I felt like Alice felt 13 or 14, and you were like, no, she seems 10.
Yeah. Well, to me.
A little bit of that is that I'm not around 10-year-olds.
Right.
So what are 10-year-olds like? I'm not always sure. But the reason that came up, like her voice actress and the way that her voice is done is very young.
Mm-hmm.
Just looking at, it was especially from her scene where she's saying, I give myself very good advice. And that scene is a very prototypical Disney princess scene. Like, Alice was never a Disney, I don't think she's ever been in the canon of Disney princesses. If she was, it was very much in the beginning before they had that many.
Mm-hmm.
And again, princesses is a marketing term. But that scene where she's crying, the way it's lit, the way she's drawn, the way the animals are starting to sort of creep in and watch and look sad, everything about the way that scene is done is just very much, it's like, this is a princess moment.
Yeah.
I just felt like looking at her animation and that she's drawn older. But maybe it was just that scene, and maybe that just colored my impression of the entire rest of it.
I would say her behavior and her curiosity and all those things, spot on age-wise, in my opinion.
That kind of curiosity and imagination, I think, is wonderful and should be encouraged, especially at that age. So just, maybe teach your kids not to crawl through logs, especially teach your kids not to wander off after talking white rabbits without telling anyone where they're
100%.
going.
I think that, we could approach this one, we can just kind of discuss the vignettes / characters, because the characters kind of do come through in the vignettes. Like, so the first ones we meet are like Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
It's a movie that is very much just like showcases for characters really quick. We've got the White Rabbit who doesn't really have much of a character moment.
At least not at the beginning, yeah.
You've got that thing they call the caucus race, which is just, it feels, I don't even know why that was there. The doorknob, though, I will point out, the doorknob was original to the movie, and he is very memorable.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because they put him in other Disney things, but we get the doorknob, we get the caucus race, completely forgettable. But then, yeah, Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
Don't like them.
They showed up, and the first thing I put in my notes is, I've never liked them, and I don't know why. And then they are just obnoxious.
Yes, and honestly, the way they behave.
They feel, like, entitled.
And not bright.
Yeah, I'll have to look up that whole thing of, like, who inspired which characters, because I'm sure that they're like, oh, Tweedledee and Tweedledum are exactly like these annoying guys that this person that Lewis Carroll knew that he didn't like, or that he did like, who knows.
The whole time I was watching that, it was just like, this makes me feel ick. And I can't put words to why.
And the honking in between the words, and I was just like, I didn't enjoy them. Although, that's one of my favorite. This movie had so many weird connections. So many. When I started, this is going to be so hard not to talk about rabbit holes. Because this is a movie
full of rabbit holes.
Not just the story, but like when you start looking into how it was made, who was in it, how they influenced. There are rabbit holes everywhere. Yes. But favorite connection in the voice cast, other than Verna Felton, is that Tweedledee and Tweedledum are both voiced by J. Pat O'Malley, who was Cyril the horse.
Yeah.
With the Cockney accent. Okay, well, that actually makes me like Tweedledee and Tweedledum a tiny bit better. But then I read that he also was Dick Van Dyke's voice coach for Mary Poppins.
Yes.
When Dick Van Dyke did what is considered one of the worst accents ever put to film, but especially one of the worst Cockney accents. Apparently he's Irish. I don't know if Cyril's Cockney accent is actually terrible. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was interesting that, like, Tweedledee and Tweedledum, I loved Cyril. He was a funny character, but, like, I hate these characters. I don't know what they're doing in the movie. And then to find out that the voice actor was the one that sort of, like, led Dick Van Dyke astray in Mary Poppins, in the making of Mary Poppins, I was like, that sounds like them. Yeah, so that was funny. But they are just, and The Walrus and the Carpenter is a terrible story.
Yep. Oh, so I was going to say, like, there's a lot of this movie to me that is, like, nightmare fuel. And one of the things is when she's riding in the bottle on the river of her own tears.
Right.
And don't like this. Do not like this, although I loved the purple water.
The water is drawn very beautifully.
The whole Walrus and Carpenter scene, I was like, I also don't like this.
And again, all from the book. The Walrus and the Carpenter is like line for line from the book. I don't know. I don't know if, like, it read better in the 1860s or something, but to me, and especially when you're watching it animated, so you're watching these adorable little baby oysters. They come dancing out of the sea with their tiny little, like, feet, and they're still wearing the little bibs. They're so cute, these tiny little baby oysters.
And they're about to get eaten.
And thank goodness they cut away, and we don't see anything of it. We just see their dead bodies, basically, because you see the empty shells. And the fact that they know they're about to be eaten. Like, the last shot that you see of them is when they realize that they're about to be eaten. What is the moral of this? Why is this here? What is this? I don't know what kids are going to take from this.
I think, that goes back to what we've talked about, where, back then, they were much more comfortable showing kids really terrible things. Mm-hmm. And then also, you kind of get the feeling when you're watching that story that the real point that they think they're making is like the walrus ate all of the oysters and didn't leave any for the carpenter. And it's just, disregard the fact that the oysters were babies and they were cute and they had little bibs.
Yeah.
Look at what he did, that guy. And no, he lured those little babies, and their mom knew better. And she was like, no, we shouldn't do this. And she's like, I'm going to stay here. And the little babies are like, we're going to go. And it's terrible. I hated this part.
They say something about, well, the oysters were curious and see what happened to them. And I'm like,
yeah,
but curiosity is a good thing, actually.
Yeah.
And apparently in the original poem, or in the way that the original poem is presented, the walrus and the carpenter both eat some of the oysters, but the walrus eats a lot more. And so then Alice has a whole debate about whether she likes, which characters she likes better, because the walrus ate more of them, and that's just not nice.
Yeah, he's a hog.
Yeah, and in the end, they're like, well, the carpenter would have eaten more if he had been able to, so it's not like he's better and he ate less on purpose. And she's like, okay, well, then they both suck.
Right.
It's just one of those things that I know that if they had adapted this book and not included it, people would have been very angry.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm just like, that vignette, I'm fine with losing it.
And I don't, for the record, mean to sound like I hated every part of this movie, but there's so many parts where I was like, nope, the Tweedles creep me out. I don't like them.
Yeah, they're odd. And I think that there are other adaptations of this story where they haven't set me on edge quite so much, but they usually do. I usually don't like them.
I don't like the oysters. I don't like it when she's floating in a bottle. There's so many things. Also the walrus, he lights his cigar numerous times and has no tusks. And I don't know if that makes him technically a lady walrus or if there are male walruses that don't have tusks. I have no idea about walrus sexual dimorphism and all that jazz, but
that character design and the way that it's done, it feels Merry Melodies / Silly Symphonies, because the carpenter is drawn very much in like a cartoon style that humans are being drawn in that time, in those like short gag cartoons.
Yep.
It just feels like one of those, but really dark.
Very dark indeed. And then I love how when all that's over, Alice is just like, I'm out of here. And she just walks away.
They're like, no, we're going to tell you another story. We're going to start telling you this other story. And she's like, yeah, I'm gone.
She's like,
I'm just going to leave.
No, you're not.
It's, yeah. Revisiting the Vault is a 9-Hour Films production, and it's edited by Mary Ratliff. Our music is by Music Motion and Lynn Publishing. We are not affiliated with or authorized by the Walt Disney Company. You can find us on Twitter at Revisit the Vault, and you can find our website at revisitingthevault.com. Don't forget to check out our Patreon. Patrons can get personalized thank you cards, stickers, and access to deleted scenes and outtakes. You can find that over at patreon.com/9hourfilms. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is to tell other people about the show, and make sure that you leave a review in whatever app you're using to listen. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.